From the very beginning, Charlotte's life was not her own. Her father, George, was a man of indulgence, vain, extravagant, drowning in debt and scandal. Her mother, Caroline of Brunswick, was German, misunderstood, and politically inconvenient. Their marriage was a disaster, an explosive union that turned violent before Charlotte could speak her first words. She was raised in two separate prisons, her mother's chaotic, isolated world, and her father's icy, overbearing court. They fought over her like a trophy. Custody became a battlefield. Charlotte was dragged between palaces and politics, loved by the public but abandoned by her own parents. In letters, Charlotte's tutors describe her as impulsive but bright, honest of fault, and desperate to be loved. She rode horses fiercely and laughed too loud for a princess. Servants whispered that she'd sneak food to the kitchen staff and cry when anyone mentioned her mother. To the outside world, she was England's darling, the future queen, the hope of reform, the antidote to her father's corruption. But behind closed doors, Charlotte was deeply alone. Her father paraded mistresses through the halls and tried to erase her mother from public life. Her mother fled England in humiliation, leaving Charlotte behind. She would never see her again. The young princess grew up watching her mother's disgrace and her father's manipulation. She knew early on women in the palace were either ornamental or expendable. There was no safe place, not even a nursery. And still, the court smiled in stitched dresses, pretending nothing was broken. But while the empire dressed her in diamonds and duty, fate was already writing her tragedy in ink. Despite everything, the fractured home, the tabloid humiliation, the court's coldness, Charlotte became what no one expected. Loved, not just tolerated, not just admired, but loved truly by the British people. She was warm and real in a world of marble masks. She laughed loudly, rode horses without a lady's posture, and once stormed out a royal dinner because someone insulted her mother. When a servant tripped carrying a tray, she knelt down to help pick it up. That wasn't royalty. That was humanity. The people clung to her. To them, Charlotte represented the future. Young, strong-willed, unspoiled by her father's vanity. She might, they believed, be the queen who could heal the crown's wounds. Reformers, liberals, and the poor saw her as a future monarch who would care. She was the anti-George, and they loved her for it. But inside the palace, her rising popularity made her dangerous. The Prince Regent, her father, tightened control. He pushed for a political marriage. A union with William of Orange, a man Charlotte found cold and dull. It was a transaction, nothing more. She refused. Publicly, their arguments became infamous. Charlotte once locked herself in a room to avoid being dragged to meet him again. The scandal made headlines. Her father fumed. And then came him, Prince Leopold of Saxe-Coburg, a relatively poor German nobleman, but gentle, thoughtful, and unshaken by palace games. Charlotte was 19. He was 26. Their courtship was cautious, but real. For once, someone saw her not as a pawn, not as a symbol, but as a woman. Against her father's will, Charlotte fought for the marriage. And for once, she won. The wedding was held on May 2nd, 1816. The nation erupted in celebration. Crowds lined the streets. Newspapers called it a fairy tale. Charlotte wore a silver dress, no jewels. Simple, elegant, like her. She wept as she said her vows. Leopold kissed her hand afterward. It wasn't a royal performance. It was love. For the first time in her short, turbulent life, Charlotte was safe. Happy. At least, for a moment. It was a royal wedding fit for a queen, but the bells would ring again for her funeral. When Princess Charlotte announced her pregnancy in early 1817, Britain erupted in joy. Bells rang. Cannons fired. Crowds gathered in front of Buckingham House just to cheer. The nation had lost faith in her father, the Prince Regent. But Charlotte? Charlotte was the future. And now she was carrying it inside her. This child would be third in line to the throne. A direct path toward restoring hope, stability, and compassion to a monarchy that had become cold and bloated with scandal. The people wrote poems about the baby. Portraits were painted before the child even had a heartbeat. Charlotte herself? She was radiant. A little sick, often tired but glowing. She walked with her hand protectively over her stomach. And Leopold, her gentle husband, never left her side. But behind the glow, something was wrong. By her 6th month, Charlotte had gained almost no weight. Her appetite was fading. She had headaches and swelling in her legs. Modern medicine would recognize the early signs of preeclampsia. But in 1817, such things were misunderstood or ignored, and then came the fateful decision. The royal court appointed Sir Richard Croft to oversee the birth. Croft was respected, yes, but rigid, conservative, and obsessed with natural delivery. He refused to use forceps, believed surgery was a last resort, and rejected the idea of calling in physicians unless it was an absolute emergency. He insisted Charlotte be denied stimulants, denied food, denied the evolving methods used elsewhere in Europe, and despite mounting signs of trouble, no one questioned him. Leopold was worried, but Charlotte, like most women of her time, had little control over her own body once doctors stepped in. She trusted them. She trusted the palace. She trusted the system. The court sent away any alternate doctors. They locked the process down. Charlotte was moved to Claremont House, away from London. There, in the quiet countryside, she was told to rest, wait, and pray, and all of Britain waited with her. The newspapers spoke daily of her condition. Tailors were commissioned to begin stitching the baby's first garments. Street vendors sold painted cups of the royal heir. People were already arguing about what name the baby should have. But inside the walls of Claremont, Charlotte couldn't sleep. Her legs ached. Her breath grew shallow. And Sir Richard Croft? He just smiled and told her she was fine. And when she finally went into labor, it would last 50 hours. It began quietly. When Princess Charlotte announced her pregnancy in early 1817, Britain erupted in joy. Bells rang. Cannons fired. Crowds gathered in front of Buckingham House just to cheer. The nation had lost faith in her father, the Prince Regent. But Charlotte? Charlotte was the future. And now she was carrying it inside her. This child would be third in line to the throne. A direct path toward restoring hope, stability, and compassion to a monarchy that had become cold and bloated with scandal. The people wrote poems about the baby. Portraits were painted before the child even had a heartbeat. Charlotte herself? She was radiant. A little sick, often tired, but glowing. She walked with her hand protectively over her stomach. And Leopold, her gentle husband, never left her side. But behind the glow, something was wrong. By her 6th month, Charlotte had gained almost no weight. Her appetite was fading. She had headaches and swelling in her legs. Modern medicine would recognize the early signs of preeclampsia. But in 1817, such things were misunderstood or ignored, and then came the fateful decision. The royal court appointed Sir Richard Croft to oversee the birth. Croft was respected, yes, but rigid, conservative, and obsessed with natural delivery. He refused to use forceps, believed surgery was a last resort, and rejected the idea of calling in physicians unless it was an absolute emergency. He insisted Charlotte be denied stimulants, denied food, denied the evolving methods used elsewhere in Europe, and despite mounting signs of trouble, no one questioned him. Leopold was worried, but Charlotte, like most women of her time, had little control over her own body once doctors stepped in. She trusted them. She trusted the palace. She trusted the system. The court sent away any alternate doctors. They locked the process down. Charlotte was moved to Claremont House, away from London. There, in the quiet countryside, she was told to rest, wait, and pray, and all of Britain waited with her. The newspapers spoke daily of her condition. Tailors were commissioned to begin stitching the baby's first garments. Street vendors sold painted cups of the royal heir. People were already arguing about what name the baby should have. But inside the walls of Claremont, Charlotte couldn't sleep. Her legs ached. Her breath grew shallow. And Sir Richard Croft? He just smiled and told her she was fine. And when she finally went into labor, it would last 50 hours. It began quietly. On the evening of November 3rd, 1817, Princess Charlotte went into labor. There was no panic, no rush. The contractions were slow, irregular. Sir Richard Croft was calm, even cheerful. He told Charlotte it would be long but manageable. Nothing unusual. She believed him. What followed was not a labor. It was a crucifixion. Hour after hour passed. Her screams grew louder, more strained. She was denied food, denied stimulants. Her lips cracked from thirst. Her breathing became shallow. The baby wasn't moving. But Croft refused to intervene. He believed in patience. He believed in nature. He believed in silence. Charlotte labored for 10 hours, then 20, then 30. She begged for help. Nurses wept at her side. Her husband, Leopold, sat helplessly at the door, forbidden from interfering. He wasn't even allowed to hold her hand. Croft said it was improper. On the 50th hour, after a final contraction that left her body convulsing, the baby boy was born. Still, lifeless, perfectly formed, but silent. Charlotte sobbed once, and then fell quiet. They wrapped the infant in a cloth and placed him in a cradle beside her. No one told the public. No bells were rung. Croft sat in a chair at the end of the bed. The nurses changed the sheets, wiped the blood from Charlotte's legs. No one noticed how pale she had become, how her pulse had slowed, how she wasn't speaking anymore. That evening, she tried to sit up. She reached for water. And then, suddenly, violently, she began a hemorrhage. Blood soaked through the linens. It poured from her in waves. The sheets turned red. The floor, sticky. Her breaths became shallow gasps. A nurse screamed for help, but Croft dismissed her. She's simply faint. She wasn't. At 2:30 a.m., Charlotte Augusta, England's future queen, the daughter of fractured empire, the one person everyone had pinned their hopes on, died from internal bleeding. She was 21 years old. Leopold collapsed beside her, sobbing. He clutched her hand. It was already cold. He kissed her forehead and refused to let go. The nation didn't even know yet. There were no palace announcements, no mourning drapes, no wailing bells, just silence. For hours, the public still believed everything was fine. And Croft? He sat in a daze. 3 months later, he would take his own life, shooting himself with a pistol in his medical office. He never wrote a confession. He simply left behind one note. I have failed her. But Charlotte's death was not just a personal tragedy. It changed the destiny of an empire. The morning after Charlotte's death, Britain awoke to a silence it could not understand. Church bells didn't ring. Newspapers hadn't printed anything yet. The markets opened as usual. And then a whisper moved through the streets. The princess is dead. People didn't believe it at first. They couldn't. The woman they had watched grow from a child of scandal into a princess of the people. Dead without warning? But then came the official statement, and the wailing began. Across England, businesses shut their doors. Black cloth was draped from balconies. Portraits of Charlotte were placed in shop windows, surrounded by candles. Thousands attended public prayers. Even hardened political satirists, who once mocked the royal family mercilessly, published pages drenched in sorrow. Charlotte's funeral was held on November 19th, 1817. Over 200,000 people lined the roads from Claremont to Windsor. Many stood silently in the rain for hours just to catch a glimpse of the coffin. Some wept openly. Grown men collapsed to their knees as it passed. And yet, there was no queen to mourn her, no reigning monarch to steady the people, just her grief-stricken husband and a broken crown. For the royal family, Charlotte's death was more than personal devastation. It was a dynastic crisis. She had been the only legitimate grandchild of King George III. With her gone, the entire line of succession unraveled. Her father, the Prince Regent, was too scandal-ridden to produce another heir. Her uncles were aging bachelors, some in exile, others drunk with disgrace. In a panic, the royal family scrambled. Within months of Charlotte's death, her bachelor uncles, previously uninterested in marriage, suddenly began courting European princesses, racing to secure a new heir. It was desperation. The monarchy had no backup plan, and from that desperation came a new figure, a baby girl born in 1819 to one of Charlotte's uncles, a quiet child named Alexandrina Victoria. She would never meet Charlotte. She would never know the woman the people once pinned their hopes on. but she would inherit Charlotte's place, her title, her future, and the empire would one day call her queen. But for all that Queen Victoria would become, she rose in the shadow of a woman whose crown was buried before it ever touched her head. After Charlotte died, Prince Leopold was never the same. In the days following the funeral, he locked himself inside Claremont House. The nursery, still prepared for baby, remained untouched. He refused visitors. He stopped eating. One servant later recalled that Leopold would walk into Charlotte's bedroom and sit for hours beside her empty chair, whispering to no one. He was just 27, a widower, a father without a child. Leopold turned down all marriage proposals for years. He wore black every day for nearly a decade, and though he eventually accepted a throne, becoming the first king of Belgium, he never let go of her. When his niece Victoria was born, Leopold became her mentor, guardian, and father figure. He guided her gently toward the crown, knowing she now stood where Charlotte should have. And when Victoria later asked about the aunt she never knew, Leopold simply said, "She was the heart of England, and they let her die." But Charlotte didn't disappear. Quietly, she remained in the margins of royal history, not in triumph, but in warning. Midwives would whisper her name when a noblewoman's labor became too long. Doctors remembered Sir Richard Croft and taught their students how not to repeat his mistakes. Her death triggered sweeping reforms in maternal care across Britain. It forced the crown to rethink succession, duty, and the human cost of power. And yet, she was never crowned, never ruled, never seen as the queen she would have been, just a ghost in a silver wedding dress. Today, there are no palaces named after her, no grand state portraits in Buckingham, only a simple tomb beside her stillborn son at St. George's Chapel, two names carved in marble, surrounded by silence. But when the bells toll for queens and empires somewhere in her echoes, she is still there. The girl who almost wore the crown, the queen who died in the cradle of history. Most people don't know her name. Princess Charlotte of Wales is barely mentioned in history classes. She left behind no reign, no royal legacy, no heirs. Her name isn't etched on coins or statues. She is a historical footnote, often eclipsed by the queen who came after her. But behind every powerful empire is the ghost of someone who never got the chance. Charlotte was born into duty, shaped by cruelty, loved fiercely by a nation, and when she died, in that dark room, after 50 hours of pain, Britain didn't just lose a daughter. It lost the queen it might have needed most. Her story is more than tragedy. It's a mirror for every woman whose voice is dismissed in the name of tradition, for every mother told to endure instead of be heard, for every life cut short by silence dressed as expertise, and for every throne, literal or metaphorical, still waiting for the woman who never got to claim it. Today, we speak Charlotte's name not just to mourn her, but to remember how empires are shaped not only by the rulers we know, but by the ones we lost. And sometimes the greatest legacy is the crown that never touched a head,